In the fading twilight of 1840 South Texas, a lone frontiersman named Jeff Turner stood over a fallen Comanche warrior. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, sharper than any predator of the plains. Methodically, he took the scalp, his 43rd trophy, from a man riddled with 7 bullet wounds. It was part of a vengeful campaign born from unimaginable loss. The act was cool, deliberate, and carried out in the chaos of battle. It captured the brutal reality of the Texas frontier, where Comanche raiders had ruled vast lands through centuries of relentless warfare, only to face settlers driven by equal parts fear and vengeance. But what forces pushed Turner from grief to such ruthless action? And how did this moment reflect the tragic collision of cultures at the edge of America? The clash that drove Jeff Turner's brutal pursuit in 1840 South Texas did not arise from nowhere. By then, the Comanche had built an empire across the southern plains, stretching from present-day Kansas to Texas. Their dominion was carved over decades of relentless warfare. Historical accounts describe campaigns against the Apache that displaced entire communities, all in a ruthless bid for the richest bison hunting grounds, an achievement of strategic brilliance that still invites unease. Was this expansion, born of survival, so different from the colonial ambitions soon to challenge it? Long before they ruled the plains, the Comanche were a small offshoot of the Shoshone. They lived a hunter-gatherer life in the northern Rockies, often pushed aside by stronger tribes. Everything changed in the 17th century when Spanish horses reached the New World. The turning point came in 1680 with the Pueblo Revolt, a bloody uprising in New Mexico. Over 400 Spanish settlers were killed, churches burned, and thousands of horses scattered across the plains. The Comanche seized the moment, not just adopting the horse, but mastering it in ways that reshaped their destiny. They became unmatched riders, hunters, and breeders, turning into a nomadic force unlike any other. This mastery of the horse fueled their rise. By the 1840s, the Comanche lived in step with the vast bison herds, taking nearly every need, food, clothing, tools from these animals. Their mobility allowed them to strike hard against anyone who crossed into their territory, whether Spanish, Mexican, or Anglo-Texan settlers. In settler accounts, these raids were painted as brutal and indiscriminate. But from the Comanche view, they were acts of defiance, a fight to protect their way of life from relentless intrusion. Both sides committed atrocities, settlers massacred, villages destroyed, leaving the question, when does defense turn into destruction? By 1840, tales of Comanche raids spread fear through Texas. Every story of loss fed settler outrage. Anglo-Texans and Mexicans saw the Comanche as an existential threat, pointing to attacks that spared neither women nor children. Yet, this fear often ignored the Comanche's own reality, a people fighting to preserve a culture shaped by centuries of adaptation and sacrifice. Their resilience, born of necessity, clashed with the settlers' drive to expand, setting the stage for a collision of pride and survival. In this tense landscape, a band of young Texas Rangers, eager but untested, rode out to confront the lords of the plains. They were about to discover the price of underestimating their foe. In the volatile crucible of 1840 South Texas, where the pounding of Comanche hooves had long set the rhythm of the plains, a band of about a dozen Texas Rangers made a near-fatal mistake. These young frontiersmen, full of the era's brash ambition, camped near the Zumwalt Settlement. So confident were they that they failed to secure their horses a basic rule of survival on the frontier. At dawn, the cost of that oversight became clear. During the night, the Comanche had slipped past unseen, taking every mount. The Rangers trudged into town on foot, saddles slung over their shoulders like badges of shame. This silent, surgical strike exposed just how unprepared the settlers were for a foe whose stealth was as legendary as their ferocity. Leading this chastened group was 23-year-old William Alexander Anderson Wallace, a man who would one day be remembered in Texas lore as Bigfoot Wallace. His pride wounded and his thirst for retribution burning, Wallace secured fresh horses from a local rancher and set out in pursuit. Yet his first command already carried the mark of failure, a warning against the hubris that plagued inexperienced settlers. The Comanche's unseen approach had mocked their overconfidence, leaving one question hanging. How could men so eager to claim the frontier underestimate an enemy who had mastered it for generations? Beneath their outward bravado, the Rangers felt a creeping dread. Most had never faced the Comanche in battle. They had heard the stories raids marked by torture, loss, and unflinching violence tales that moved through Texas settlements like wildfire. Now they knew the truth. The raiders could have slit their throats instead of merely taking their horses. That realization gnawed at their resolve, revealing the fragility beneath the bold facade. And it posed a harder truth: did these tales of terror fuel a cycle of violence that neither side could escape? Wallace would go on to live until 1899, reaching the age of 82 and becoming a towering figure in Texas history. But in this moment, he was still a rookie commander, unsure and learning fast. His Rangers were a semi-formal militia, dressed in a patchwork of buckskin leggings, cotton shirts, and sombreros, a reflection of their disorder, but also of their grit. Resilient, yet untested, they pressed into the unforgiving plains. They would need more than courage. They needed a guide shaped by the frontier's harshest lessons. That guide was waiting ahead. And when they met him, his presence would change the course of their hunt. Who was this man? And what scars had driven him to join their desperate chase? As the Texas Rangers pressed their pursuit across the unforgiving plains of 1840, still carrying the weight of humiliation and fear, a lone figure appeared on the horizon. His presence was as unsettling as the Comanche shadows they hunted. It was Jeff Turner, a man in his late 30s. His buckskin shirt and leggings were caked with dust. A coonskin cap sat low on his head. He rode a raw-boned horse named Pepperpod, nervous, yet fiercely loyal. Turner carried an old Kentucky rifle, a single-shot pistol, and a tomahawk. A knife hung at his belt, its handle darkened with rust-colored stains of dried blood. William Alexander Anderson Wallace would later recall in his memoirs that Turner's eyes glittered like those of a panther or a wolf. It was the gaze of a man weathered by relentless trauma. Against the young ranger's mix of buckskins, cotton, and sombreros, Turner's demeanor stood apart. The question rose unspoken: was this stranger an ally or a threat? Turner soon revealed the scars that defined him. Years before, a Comanche raid had destroyed his world, killing his wife and 3 sons. Since then, he had lived alone in a creekside camp north of Victoria, Texas. There, 42 Comanche scalps hung inside his tent, grim trophies in a vow to reach 100 or die trying. The story stirred the Rangers' sympathy, but it also invited a darker thought. Turner's vengeance mirrored the grief-driven raids of the Comanche, who fought to defend their own people from encroachment. Did such retribution honor the dead or only tighten the knot of hatred binding both sides to endless bloodshed? Recognizing the Rangers' inexperience, Turner offered his unmatched skills honed over years of tracking from the Texas plains to the Rio Grande. He vowed to hunt the raiders for scalps, whether or not the Rangers stayed the course. His voice carried the finality of a man for whom retreat was no longer possible. That promise exposed the gulf between the Rangers' shared bravado and Turner's hardened solitude. It formed a tense, reluctant alliance, one that could lead to salvation or drag them into the frontier's darkest depths. With Turner at their head, the chase took on a new urgency. Each mile brought them closer to a confrontation that would test their courage and reveal the true cost of their quest. With Jeff Turner at their head, the Texas Rangers' pursuit of the Comanche raiders in 1840 gained a relentless edge. Every mile became a test of endurance under the frontier's unforgiving demands. For hours, Turner led the dozen young men across the rugged South Texas plains. His tracking skills were unmatched. He read faint signs on rocky ground where others saw only dust. The Rangers, still smarting from their earlier humiliation, pushed their horses at a brisk trot under Turner's unyielding command. As dusk stretched long shadows over the land, Turner stopped abruptly and raised his hand in a sharp signal. His warning was terse. Comanche sentries could be near, and silence was now their only protection. In that instant, the novices, once brash and untested, yielded to Turner's authority. A new hierarchy had formed, born from the harsh necessities of survival. But what did it mean to place their fate in the hands of a man driven by such focused vengeance? Moving with cautious precision through the fading light, they advanced 300 yards. Then, to their right, a quarter-mile away, they spotted the outline of a Comanche cold camp, its occupants unaware of the danger creeping closer. Turner seized the moment. He spurred his horse into a sudden charge, the Rangers close behind. The thunder of hooves shattered the stillness. But the Comanche, ever watchful, caught sight of them at 50 yards. Their response was swift and lethal. A volley of arrows and gunfire cut through the air. The Rangers dismounted, answering with a ragged burst of rifle fire. The camp erupted into chaos, a brutal clash of irregular warfare where no side held the clear advantage. William Alexander Anderson Wallace would later recall the raw intensity of such encounters, where a single heartbeat could decide who lived and who died. The Comanches' rapid counterattack, grounded in their mastery of mobile combat, was a stark reminder of their resilience, a people defending their land with the same ferocity settlers brought to claim it. How could a moment of surprise collapse so quickly into visceral violence? And what price would both sides pay? As arrows hissed and rifles roared, the Rangers and their enigmatic guide were pulled deeper into the fight, their fates now bound to the outcome of this bloody encounter. As the gunfire faded and the Comanche vanished into the South Texas night of 1840, the Texas Rangers stood amid the wreckage of their clash, their breaths heavy with the weight of survival. Having reclaimed most of their stolen horses, the group kindled a fire, its flickering light casting long shadows over the bloodied plains. Around the flames, joined by a subdued Jeff Turner, they shared a hot meal, the first respite in a grueling day. In a rare moment of levity, one ranger recounted his blunder, mistaking a gnarled stump for a charging Comanche, firing wildly into the dark. The tale drew chuckles, piercing the lingering tension, and even Turner let out a booming laugh, a sound so unfamiliar it seemed to startle him. This fleeting glimpse of humanity, preserved in William Alexander Anderson Wallace's memoirs, raises a poignant question: could laughter, however brief, mend the fractures of a frontier scarred by loss? Yet, the warmth of the fire could not hold Turner long. His laughter faded, replaced by a distant gaze, his eyes reflecting the echoes of his wife and sons, lost to a Comanche raid years before. After a brief rest, the group rode back to the Zumwalt Settlement, where Turner offered a curt farewell, his belt heavy with fresh scalps. He returned to his solitary hunts, a path unbroken by the camaraderie of that night. Reports years later noted him drifting back to the settlement, trading supplies for ammunition, each visit marked by new trophies, a pattern that speaks to the enduring isolation of a man tethered to vengeance. The Comanche, too, bore their own scars, their retreat a tactical choice to preserve a way of life under siege. How does one measure the cost of such solitude, whether borne by a lone frontiersman or a people defending their ancestral lands? Wallace, the young leader who would become a Texas legend, rode away from that firelight toward a storied career, his exploits chronicled in memoirs that would captivate generations until his death in 1899 at age 82. Yet, his account of Jeff Turner's fate remained elusive, claiming ignorance despite a later contradiction, a 1930s recollection from a friend hinting at untold details. This discrepancy underscores the fragile nature of oral histories, where truth weaves through memory's haze. The Rangers' brief alliance with Turner, forged in blood and tempered by laughter, left an indelible mark, prompting a final reflection. What truths lie buried in the silences of those who survived the frontier's crucible, and how do they shape our understanding of its native guardians? As Wallace's legend grew and Turner's shadow receded, their story invites us to look beyond the violence, toward the resilient spirit of the Comanche and the deeper questions that linger. Gunfire faded into the South Texas night of 1840, and the Comanche slipped away. The Texas Rangers stood amid the wreckage of the fight, breathing hard under the weight of survival. Most of their stolen horses had been reclaimed. They kindled a fire, its flickering light casting long shadows across the blood-stained plains. Around the flames, with a subdued Jeff Turner among them, they shared a hot meal, the first relief in a punishing day. In a rare moment of levity, one ranger told how he had mistaken a twisted stump for a charging Comanche and fired wildly into the darkness. Laughter broke through the tension, and even Turner let out a booming laugh, a sound so unfamiliar it startled him. William Alexander Anderson Wallace would later preserve this moment in his memoirs, leaving us to wonder, could laughter, however brief, mend the fractures of a frontier scarred by loss? The warmth of the fire held Turner only for a while. His smile faded, replaced by a distant stare, his eyes reflecting memories of his wife and sons, lost to a Comanche raid years earlier. After a short rest, the group rode back to the Zumwalt Settlement. Turner gave a curt farewell, his belt heavy with fresh scalps, and returned to his solitary hunts. In the years that followed, reports placed him back at the settlement from time to time, trading for ammunition. Each visit brought new trophies. The pattern spoke of a man locked in a cycle of vengeance he could not break. The Comanche bore their own scars. Their withdrawal that night had been a tactical choice, meant to protect a way of life under siege. How does one measure the cost of such solitude, whether carried by a lone frontiersman or by a people defending their ancestral lands? Wallace, the young leader destined to become a Texas legend, rode from that firelight into a storied career. His memoirs would captivate generations until his death in 1899 at the age of 82. Yet his account of Jeff Turner's fate remained elusive. He claimed not to know. Despite later contradictions, a 1930s recollection from a friend hinted at details left untold. The gap highlights the fragility of oral histories, where truth threads its way through the haze of memory. The Rangers' short alliance with Turner, born in battle and tempered by laughter, left a mark that time could not erase. It prompts a final reflection. What truths lie buried in the silences of those who survived the frontier's crucible? And how do they shape our understanding of its native guardians? Wallace's legend grew, and Turner's shadow faded into the wide plains. Their encounter invites us to see the Comanche not simply as adversaries, but as a people of remarkable resilience and cultural depth, fierce guardians of ancestral lands whose story stirs empathy even within the tragedies of conquest. In this brutal tapestry, one question remains. How might history have changed if mutual understanding had tempered the blades of vengeance?